Suella Braverman has caused division within the Tory party after she quashed rumours that she will defect to Reform. Instead, it seems she is likely going to run for leader, but has suggested that moving to the centre isn't what they should do. Suella Braverman, who is believed to be preparing a leadership bid to replace Rishi Sunak, said the Conservatives risked becoming centrist cranks. She has suggested the Tories should find an accommodation with Reform and welcome Mr Farage into the party following the disastrous election result that saw Labour win a landslide. So, not joining Reform, but suggesting Farage could join the Conservatives. So Suella Braverman, so it looks like she's staying inside the party. I mean, there was speculation that she was going to defect to Reform. That would be unwise, by the way, because in her seat, Reform got 18%. I think they were fifth. So she would never retain her seat as a Reform candidate, but she possibly could at the next election as a Tory candidate, right? But she says she doesn't want the party to move to the centre, and she went as far as saying that those who do are centrist cranks. Now, I do have to say, critical support to Suella Braverman. There are a lot of centrist cranks out there. The term crank is thrown around by the centrists so much, particularly towards the left. But centrists are just as much, if not more, ideological. However, she also said she would welcome Farage to the Tory party. So let's talk about Suella Braverman. She is happy to cause divisions in the Conservatives. Has this made it less likely that she's going to be leader?
I don't think so. I'm kind of at this point. I'm kind of hoping that she does win the leadership, because if
Mm.
she becomes leader of the opposition, and she brings Nigel Farage and co into the party, I honestly believe that that will firmly solidify the Conservatives not winning another general election for at least a decade, because the general consensus of Conservative voters don't want this right-wing Conservative Party. We know that because of how people voted. How many people didn't vote Conservative, and the huge share of the votes that they lost in the election. And actually, anyone with any sense within the Conservative Party has come out and said very clearly that if the Conservative Party is to survive, they need to move back towards the centre. Those centrist cranks that she refers to need to be the ones running the party if they want to survive and keep going any longer. And actually, if Braverman becomes leader and brings in the likes of Farage and Lee Anderson back and the rest of them, one, I think that will help get rid of Reform, because the Conservatives will just replace them. And I honestly think they will then perform as well as Reform have done, and we'll be in a situation come 5 years down the line where we've got this far right, really far right, um, hard right Conservative Party that is basically Reform UK, that still get 4 million of the votes, and hopefully we'll have a huge boom in votes for other left wing parties and have this wonderful government that exists with all these left wing parties in charge. I mean, that's a utopia and a dream, obviously, but I in short, I do think it would. I do think it would help cripple the Conservatives. If the Conservative membership have got any sense, though, they'll ensure that doesn't happen, and they will install somebody a little bit more to the centre. Probably, I think they could do with somebody pretty boring at the moment, someone that just sort of is in there, gets the cogs going, not like a big personality, not someone that we necessarily hear lots from at the moment. Somebody like Tom Tugendhat, who's run before, who isn't widely known about. I mean, most people in the street wouldn't even be able to tell you who he is, but he's not this sort of extreme on one side or the other.
Mm. I mean, Tom Tugendhat is first of all, there's no moderate Tory because he's come out in support of jail sentences of just a Boyle. And if you're someone who
And
is a
those are
so-called
ridiculous.
moderate, even if you're a social conservative and you're kind of like, yeah, no, I'm glad they're punished. The length of their sentencing is crazy. And when Tom come out and said this is good, I mean, he's not even a moderate. Lewis, let's go to you. What do you think? Are you on the same page as Callum, or do you have a slightly different analysis here?
Uh, there's a part of me that like kind of aligns with the theory of Callum in terms of like that's how it could go. But I
Mm.
would always say be careful what you wish for. I'll take you back to a time where we all laughed at the remote idea of someone like Boris Johnson becoming prime minister, right? That
Boom.
that was absolutely and utterly laughable at one point,
Mm.
and then it became reality. Not only did it become reality, he won like a very large landslide in terms of the history. What was it, the biggest one in however many years? There's always some record that's broken anyway. I'd be very careful what we ask for, right? Even if it could be like a Trojan horse type thing, right? If Braverman wins the leadership and invites reform over, do we think that Nigel Farage is going to be loyal to the Conservative Party or loyal to Suella Braverman? Absolutely not. He is loyal to one thing, and that is his ego and ideology. Two things.
And
Um,
Trump, 3.
but I think even align himself with Trump, or is right, it just only feeds himself, right? It helps
Well,
his
true.
image. I think as soon as he came into the party under Braverman, he'd be scheming against her to become leader from day one. And again, we could argue that people wouldn't vote for Nigel Farage, but don't forget that what some of the data is saying about how young men are moving towards more right-wing extremists in terms of politicians. We know that there is some data out there that supports that a lot of young men did vote for reform, and we're talking about in 5 years' time. So that population of people will increase too.
But
So
4 million voters, though, it's the same as what UKIP got in 2015. And I mean, if the Conservative Party essentially becomes Reform, obviously the Conservatives are going to win back those votes that were lost to Reform. But are they not then going to lose? Like when you've got people like, oh my god, what the hell is his name? He does that. Rory Stewart's his name. That's who I'm thinking of. When you've got people like
yeah,
Rory Stewart who like didn't even vote Conservative in this election, and bear in mind it wasn't that long ago that he was putting himself forward to be leader of the party. When you've got people like him in the party saying we can't vote for this has gone too far to the right when Sunak's in charge, those people aren't going to get behind the Conservatives when Nigel Farage is running the show.
but it's not just about the Tory party though, is it? It's about the Labour Party as well. If
Mm.
they fail over the next 5 years, if they don't build enough houses, if a war starts or a pandemic happens, as we've
Mm.
seen, these things can happen, right?
Mhm.
And
I
if they
wanna
if they utterly fail, then yeah, it could maybe be like, okay, going back, let's go back to Conservative
Yeah,
now.
and then the right wing populism
I
comes
want to I
back,
want to
and then
jump in here, right? And I respectfully disagree with you, Callum. So
that's okay.
I think there's no strategy for the Tory party. There's nothing they can do. Um, if they quote unquote move to the centre, right? I feel like all that's going to do is drive a bigger wedge between them and Reform. Reform can pick up on their populist message and say, look at the Conservative Party, look at the Labour Party, they're exactly the same, but from the right. I think they'll actually recruit more people to Reform. If they move, or they continue this right-wing trajectory, it's shown that it cannot stop the rise of Reform, as we've seen in this election. Let's be honest, we've had Suella Braverman saying, pandering to the culture wars, and many other Tory politicians do it. Rishi Sunak too, talk about the woke culture and stuff, and that hasn't stopped Reform. The same way is how the Labour Party pandering to right-wing politics on social conservatism and immigration doesn't stop the rise of right-wing politics. It doesn't. And as we've seen in France, only the left can stop the right. Okay. The
I
idea
would
that being, but I mean, I'll finish my second point and I'll let you come back in. But I also don't see a utility in someone like Braverman or Kemi Badenoch becoming leader, because even though electorally I don't think it matters either way, what would matter is leader of the opposition. Are they going to be more moderate in their language and their politics, or are they going to be more extreme? And I think for me, politics is essentially debates. That's where ideas are won and lost, is what people talk about. And if we've got a Tory party talking about going more to the centre, shall we say, then I think the national discourse may not be as right wing. I would like to see the Tory party fight Labour on a more so-called centrist agenda than Kemi Badenoch dragging Labour to the right, because Labour are incapable of standing on their own. And when they're attacked but from the right, unfortunately, Keir Starmer, his political intuition is just to move to the right. So I think that the utility here is to have a so-called more centrist leader, because I think it could mean that the national discourse isn't quite so poisoned. And because I don't think that Kemi Badenoch or Suella Braverman would make it less likely the Tory party, coming back. or a centrist leader coming back, I think they're toast regardless. Then I would rather see a politician at the dispatch box who isn't talking about trans people in a negative way
Yeah.
or the woke agenda. I think it's better for the national discourse, and it might mean there's more space for the left to grow. Right? We can then say, oh look, the Tory party is talking about this particular thing. The Labour Party sounds exactly the same. And in a similar tactic with reform, the left can say both parties, as we've been doing before, both parties are exactly the same. Here's the left-wing economic agenda. I just think in terms of utility, the entire national discourse, it would be better if the Tories went more moderate, but I don't think it helps them electorally in any way. And I don't think
No,
that
and
a right-wing leader makes them less viable in any way either.
and I agree with you on the leader of the opposition stuff. We definitely don't want somebody further right pulling Keir Starmer in that direction. That is not what we want. We want somebody. I mean, ideally, we want someone to the left of him doing that. But I do want to push back slightly on this sort of you talked again about the right. I think you used the words the rise of the far right, and I think we need to be careful. I think because the way I see it, there is no rise of the far right in this country. There is no appetite for the far right in this
Mm.
country. The far right in this country today, the same far right that existed 15, 20 years ago. It's the same numbers, it's the same people, or it's the kids of those that have gone before, whatever. But in terms of physical numbers, I don't think we have seen the country lurch to the right. I would go as far as to argue that the country massively rejected that, because when the Conservatives started going more towards the right, it led to them having one of the biggest defeats they've ever had at the last election. And let's remember that people didn't vote Labour because they wanted Labour. They didn't vote Conservative because they didn't want what the Conservatives were offering. And yeah, all right, Reform got 5 seats, but Reform got 5 seats because of the electoral system that we have, and the way that the supporters of that party sort of happened to fall within the areas that it was. On individual votes, it was the same as what we're voting for the far right, 10, 15 years ago. And I think that actually there is a part of me that thinks, should we just let them get on with it? Let them do their little thing. Let them, if they want to try and stoke the culture wars, let them just do it in their own little bubble and just try and ignore them. Obviously, we can't ignore them when they're in opposition and they're constantly shouting back and trying to pull the Labour Party to the right, which I do acknowledge. But I think in terms of the wider discourse, the country don't want that. And if the Conservatives move more in that direction, okay, it is going to pull Labour that way. But I wonder whether that is going to open the door for the left even more, because people will realise, well, actually, we didn't want the Conservatives when they moved towards the right. We don't want reform. And now Labour are moving even more towards the right. So let's vote for the alternatives, whether that's the centrists going for the Liberal Democrats, whether that's voting Green, or Plaid or SNP, depending on where you are. But do you not think it could open it that way? Although then Lewis is be
Well, I'd
careful. what you
say,
wish for,
Lewis, I
point,
want you to
suppose,
jump
is-
in and give your view on this.
I often think about how sometimes, because we focus on politics so much, right, that we're very well aware of like people like Suella Braverman. I do still question like how popular she is outside of political circles who actually focus on it, right? Like, yeah, she gained some traction with certain virally moments, but I still question like how popular her rhetoric would be outside of like going actually into the true spotlight, right, as the leader of the opposition. I just feel like this idea of her waging a woke war, the wokerati, her clips of saying, she dreams of a picture of a plane taking off and it'll be on the front of the Telegraph the next day. Like, I think even comments like that, like, are almost like, I won't use the word too intellectual, but like the reference to wanting it to be on the front of the Telegraph is almost like it's extremely like conservative middle class, right? The people that she needs to win over to be a successful leader, the people who obviously Nigel has, and yeah, bringing them together, maybe that would work. I don't know. I just don't feel like she would be able to lead the Conservative Party to any form of success, because ultimately, I just don't think she appeals to those type of people that
Well,
they need to bring
I
back
kind of
over.
think that's not. I mean, whether the Tories can be electorally successful, I don't think that's relevant, because in my view, they cannot be electorally successful for a long time, and I think the Tories are toast no matter which way they go.
But
Because
let's not forget, we thought that about Boris Johnson though 5 years ago, and
yeah, but
the
the
Conservative
Tory
then.
party were not in that state because they're out of government, right? So even when Boris Johnson became leader, they were still the government,
Yeah,
and
that's
the
true.
Labour Party didn't look like they were anywhere near power, especially after
Yeah.
2019. But they're out of government. And we have to remember, why did people reject the Tory party? Largely, they didn't reject the Tory party because of Suella Braverman's comments or Kemi Badenoch's comments on the woke agenda. They rejected the Tory party because of people's material conditions. They rejected the Tory party because they screwed with the economy, because they screwed with mortgages. And if you're a Tory leader, the last thing you want to do is fuck up people's mortgages. That's your constituent, that's your base. So we have to look at the material thing here. And people just, and also they felt like the Conservatives were failing left, right, and centre on literally everything, and they simply just wanted to kick out the Tories. So I don't think, I think we might be reading in too much in terms of like this sort of right-wing rhetoric. I don't think it's relevant on whether the Conservatives are going to be successful or not. They're not going to be successful for the next 5 years. I think what is relevant is how successful right-wing parties are. How many more seats are Reform going to get? Could Reform be the opposition? Could the Liberal Democrats become the opposition? And I think, for me, my fear is the political debate. I want to be talking about workers' rights. I want to be talking about climate change. I want to be talking about inequality. I want to be talking about privatization. And it may be possible that if the next Tory leader is someone, again, quote unquote, centrist, that isn't muddying the debate with attacking trans people, but trying to talk about something else, and then we can say, well, look, the Labour Party and the Tory Party don't want to address the material needs. I think it's just better for the debate if that happens, rather than a so-called populist or right-wing politician who, by the way, I think in terms of the membership, they're more likely to go with someone like Braverman than Tom Tugendhat. But I think it's worse for the national discourse. That's my particular view on it. I don't know if you want to jump in.
I would push back slightly because I think rhetoric is really important when you're in the opposition, right? You need somebody to be able to use rhetoric to take down your opposition. I don't. I obviously, yes, the
Well, that's
Conservatives.
my entire argument, though, is that rhetoric is important and political debate is important, which is why I would rather see a less toxic Tory leader, because they are the opposition. They are in the dispatch box every single day. I would rather a so-called more moderate language Tory leader than someone who whips up quite right-wing lines. I think that's better for
I
politics in
agree.
general.
That's definitely what we need because, you know, as much as I love how entertaining politics is, I would love for it to be a bit more boring because it's become so toxic. However, I don't think necessarily that they obviously lost because of policy. They failed massively on policy. That's just a given, right? But to get back into power at some point, they need good rhetoric and perhaps obviously some good policy too. And they need a person who's going to be able to, bring that to the table. Maybe that's going to be in a way that's not toxic. Maybe that's going to be in a way that's like somewhat fair. I'm going to use the word somewhat because, obviously they're going to be a bit attack doggy. They're going to be a little bit culture war-y. That's always going to be there. Hopefully they'll move away from somebody as toxic as Suella Braverman. We will just obviously have to wait and see.
Let's bring up some comments and see what people are saying in terms of this. Let's go again. Super Dizzle 84. Very naive to think the Tories are toast. They came back after Tony Blair destroying John Major. If they clean house, i.e. trust ETC, they will be back. I mean, I just want to say, I'm not saying that the Tories are toast forever. I'm talking about the next 5 years. I cannot see the Conservatives coming back in the next 5 years. That doesn't necessarily happen after a defeat like this. Doesn't mean that they can't come back in 3 terms. I mean, that's definitely possible. But I just don't see how, given a pretty big night for the Reform Party winning millions of votes. And obviously, some people say, look, they got the same amount of votes as UKIP, but it's not just how many votes they got, even though that is important. It's how they've managed to take away from the Conservative Party. Like, the UKIP didn't cause the Tory Party to completely collapse, right? Whereas Reform have done so well off of the Conservatives failing pretty miserably. And I think in PR as well, they would get even more seats. But so in the next 5 years, I don't see the Tories coming back. But that doesn't mean I don't think they're going to come back ever in the future. But I do worry about. I mean, Callum, I think was it you were saying that look, there isn't really an appetite for far right politics as maybe there are in the US. I actually agree with that. But it doesn't mean that I don't think our politics hasn't shifted rightwards. I think it absolutely has. And I think that doesn't mean that I think reform or maybe a fascist far right party suddenly explodes and becomes huge. But I do worry about having 10 reform MPs or 15 reform MPs, or maybe I don't know, a Britain First kind of party getting one seat, which could happen. I think that's very, very bad. And we are in a different time to of 2015. Even though UKIP got 4 million votes, politics to me is far more toxic than when it was back in 2015, at least in terms of rhetoric.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. Although I do have to agree slightly. I think with is it super dizzle, because I think the Tories were toast in this election, and we knew that, and we said that, and I mean it was the Green Party slogan throughout, wasn't it? The Tories are toast. We had that a lot, and it was true. They were, but I do think we have to be. I think we have to be careful, and we have to. I think it all depends on which way they go. I really do. I think if it goes down the Suella Braverman route, then I think they genuinely will be toast. I think they'll ruin it for themselves if they get someone who's got a level head, who works, who focuses less on the culture wars, more on general opposition politics, and actually tries to make them. We've heard people saying about use the term the leaders are back in the grown-ups are back in the room again. I mean, I said it felt like that myself as well a couple of weeks ago. I know you're not a huge fan of that in this scenario, Curtis, but I think that's what the Conservatives need now as well. They need some grown-ups at the top of it, and at the moment, well, they've not had that. And at the moment, those that are sort of like between Badenoch and Braverman, certainly they're not going to have that. And until they get some grown-ups in charge of the party again, I think they are going to continue to be toast. So I think it's naive to think that they're going to be toast no matter what. But I think it's fair to say that if they keep going in the direction that they've moved in the last 5 years, that they will be, because they've been rejected. People don't want them. And even under the first past the post system, which has led to 5 seats for reform, the country don't want that type of politics. And actually, the vote share for the left went up as well. We saw, the Greens have got 4 MPs. We've got 5 left-wing independents. So we saw other seats where independent candidates that were on the left, and the Green Party too, I think even about 40 seats, were coming in second place, and we're doing really well and catching up with the people that they were behind. So I think we need to not forget that as a whole, the country is not right wing. Yes, our politics has moved that way, but I think that's despite that's in spite of the voters rather than
I
because of
absolutely agree, because I think I can't remember which pundit said it on Twitter today, but said kind of agree that politics hasn't moved right wing. And yes and no. Voters, I don't particularly think have moved right wing. I think actually when it comes to economic policies, they're very left wing. Our political establishment has moved right wing.
Yeah.
I'm excited to say that Turn Left has significantly grown this year. And with that, we've managed to produce far more ambitious content, interviewing high-profile people. We did a 12-hour live election show. There are multiple people behind Turn Left, but we are still working around our full-time work. But we would love it if this was our full-time. It means we could dedicate so much more and to bring even more ambitious content. So if you've been here from the beginning, or you've only recently become a viewer, if you like what we do, then you can help us out. Please like and share this video. Make sure you drop a comment. We want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear your feedback. And we desperately need more independent media. If you want to see a socialist media alternative thrive, then you could be part of that. So if you can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 per month, or any one-off donation. We can use that money to upgrade our equipment, to rent out a proper studio, and to start paying ourselves. This is only the beginning. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.